In this true crime documentary, we're diving into the horrifying case of Teresa Keel.
There were a lot of people who had a motive to attack and ultimately kill Teresa Keel.
This wouldn't be anything she wouldn't give to her students, her colleagues, her family. I worked across the hall for 30 years.
It's so sad that she's gone, and justice has to be served. I mean, there's so much hurt.
Loved ones and supporters in court describing Mrs. Keel as a devoted educator, an assistant principal and teacher for decades in the Malvern School District.
Our story begins in Nassau County, situated on the western edge of Long Island, New York. A place known for its quiet suburban streets and its oceanfront boardwalks, with the low hum of the city that never sleeps just a short commute away. Here, in the heart of this peaceful community, lived Teresa Keel. But she was much more than just another resident. She was one of the most recognizable faces around town. Her reputation wasn't built by chance or overnight. In nearly every home, there was a child, a brother, or a sister who had at one point been a student in her classroom. If there was one thing everyone knew about Teresa, it was that she had committed her entire life to children. She wasn't just a teacher. She was a mentor, a guide, and to many, she was like a second mother. Teresa was raised in Queens, New York. After completing her education, she relocated to Nassau County, where she launched her teaching career in the Malvern School District. Over the next 3 decades, she worked her way up from a classroom teacher to an assistant principal, leaving behind a powerful legacy of compassion and respect. During that period, Teresa married David Keel, a prominent dentist in Glen Cove. Together, they built what appeared to be a picture-perfect life, raising 2 children, Vincent and Francesca, surrounded by love, success, and stability. It seemed like nothing could ever disrupt their family's harmony, but fate had other plans. In 2004, tragedy struck when David passed away unexpectedly. The loss was devastating for the family, especially for the children. Vincent was only 13 and Francesca was just 7. Even in those darkest of days, Teresa refused to crumble. She held her family together with a quiet strength and an endless devotion. While working a full-time job, she earned her doctorate and went on to launch a tutoring program dedicated to helping underprivileged children navigate their path through education. Her passion carried over to her own kids as well. Vincent became a talented tennis player before he found his true calling in software and mobile app development. Francesca excelled in her studies and, with her mother's encouragement, enrolled in community college after graduating high school in 2015. By 2016, life had finally settled into a steady rhythm. Teresa could breathe again. Her children were thriving independently, and her career was fulfilling. But destiny was quietly setting the stage for a cruel twist, one that would rip this family apart for good and shatter the image of the perfect home they had rebuilt.
Now at 5 o'clock, consequences for a barbaric and deadly barbell beating on Long Island. The victim struck several times in the head with a metal barbell in December of 2016. For 2 years, she lived in a vegetative state from her severe brain injury, and then on Saturday, she died.
It was around 10:30 p.m. on December 4th, 2016, when Franklin Cosma, a resident of Long Beach, was finishing up his nightly workout. He was jogging along the city's famous 2-mile oceanfront boardwalk when he paused near New York Avenue to catch his breath. That's when he spotted something out of the ordinary. Across the street, a woman was walking toward the entrance of a small apartment building. She had just passed through the glass doors into a partially covered lobby, when, all of a sudden, a shadow emerged behind her. Within seconds, a man charged inside after her. Moments later, piercing screams tore through the quiet night air. Franklin froze for a split second, and then it hit him. The woman was being attacked. Without a second thought, he sprinted toward the building. Through the glass wall, he could see everything playing out. The assailant was wielding a large, blunt object and was striking the woman repeatedly in the head. Franklin burst into the lobby, but the attacker spotted him, dropped his weapon, and fled through a side exit into the darkness. Franklin made a split-second decision. The woman was the priority. He ran to her, finding her collapsed on the ground, barely conscious. By that point, other residents were coming out of their apartments. Franklin yelled for someone to call 911, then took off after the man who had fled. But the attacker already had a 20-second head start, and by the time Franklin reached the alleyway nearby, the figure had completely vanished into the shadows. When Franklin returned to the scene, the flashing lights from police cars, ambulances, and fire trucks were flooding the block. Paramedics worked frantically, while detectives cordoned off the area. It was only then that Franklin learned the victim's name. The victim was 54-year-old Teresa Keel, a cherished teacher and a longtime resident of the building. She had sustained catastrophic injuries to her head and face, and was barely clinging to life as paramedics rushed her to the hospital. As investigators started processing the scene, the same questions hung heavy in the air. Who could have done this to Teresa, and what was the motive? A witness, Franklin, gave his statement to the police, explaining that he saw Teresa walking alone towards her building when a tall man, around 6'3" or 6'4", wearing a hooded jacket, a winter cap, and a face covering, followed her inside and launched his attack. Based on his frame, Franklin was certain the assailant was a man, but the heavy clothing obscured any distinguishing features. He did, however, walk detectives through the exact route he took while trying to chase down the suspect. Police immediately dispatched patrol cars and canine units to canvass the area. At the same time, forensic specialists began combing through the scene, uncovering the grim reality of what had happened there. Near the chilling pool of blood where Teresa had collapsed lay her purse, her wallet, and a brown paper takeout bag, which had burst open during the struggle. Its contents were scattered across the floor. Napkins, plastic utensils, and her dinner. Nothing appeared to be missing, but what sent a chill down investigators' spines was the damage to a nearby wall. A deep, blood-splattered dent, a clear sign that the weapon used was not only heavy, but had been swung with terrifying force. Right then and there, detectives ruled out robbery. This wasn't some random mugging. This was personal. This was a deliberate, brutal assault, driven by something far darker than a simple theft. As investigators kept meticulously working the crime scene, piecing together the evidence, a call came in from the search team that was trying to track the suspect. Unfortunately, the trail had gone cold. They couldn't find him. But there was at least one positive development. Thanks to Franklin Cosma's detailed account, detectives now knew the suspect's direction of travel. As he fled the scene, they immediately started pulling surveillance footage from any nearby buildings and businesses. The video footage corroborated Franklin's story perfectly. The same chase, the same shadowy figure, the same description. The suspect was clearly visible on camera, running down the street and carrying what looked like a dark gym bag. That single detail changed the entire investigation. Detectives theorized the attacker might have carried a change of clothes or tools in that bag, a telltale sign that this assault wasn't spontaneous. It was premeditated. But the biggest break in the case came just hours later. Following the escape route seen on camera, officers discovered something resting on top of a dumpster, tucked away in a fenced-in alley. It was a metal dumbbell bar, stained with blood. The potential weapon was immediately rushed to the lab for analysis, and based on its weight and size, investigators felt confident it was the very object used in the vicious attack on Teresa Keel. While detectives were running down that new lead, officers from the Long Beach Police Department made their way to North Shore Manhasset Hospital, where Teresa had been taken after the brutal assault. What they learned there was staggering. Doctors were uncertain if she would ever regain consciousness, or even survive. At her bedside were her brother Michael and her 24-year-old son, Vincent, who had arrived just minutes after the attack. After getting a frantic call from a neighbor, Vincent told detectives he and his mother had just had dinner together earlier that evening, and everything seemed perfectly normal. They had laughed and talked, then went their separate ways, never imagining it would be the last time they'd ever share a meal. When Vincent finished his account of the evening, investigators gently posed the next question, one that would soon pivot the entire case in a new direction. Where was his sister, Francesca? He explained that he'd tried calling his sister several times, but she hadn't picked up. Still, according to Vincent, that wasn't surprising. That had become the new normal for them. This immediately caught the detectives' attention. They asked him to explain, and his answer changed everything. He told them that earlier that year, Francesca had a major falling out with both him and their mother over her relationship with her boyfriend, a 26-year-old named Ralph Keepler, who, ironically, used to be one of Vincent's best friends. Ralph worked as a corrections officer for the city of New York, but beyond his day job, he shared Vincent's passion for business and technology. So when Ralph found out Vincent was creating a dating app for college students, he wanted a piece of the action. Shortly after, Ralph and his family put up about $130,000 to fund the project. At first, things were going great, but then it all came crashing down. Their friendship started to fall apart. The second Vincent and Teresa found out Ralph was secretly seeing Francesca. They'd been together for over a year. She was just 19 at the time, right out of high school, while Ralph was a full 7 years her senior. Teresa was completely against the relationship, but Francesca wouldn't break it off. Before long, she ended up moving in with Ralph. To the investigators, the whole situation sounded messy, but it didn't raise enough red flags to make them suspects in Teresa's vicious attack. After all, it was difficult to believe a daughter could be involved in something so brutal. Nevertheless, they jotted down the couple's address and made plans to question them in person. By the time officers got to Lynn Brook, almost 3 hours had gone by since the assault. Ralph and Francesca were both at the house. When they answered the door, they seemed stunned to find police officers on their doorstep. The detectives told them why they were there and asked to interview them separately. Both consented. Ralph was taken into one room and Francesca into another. Ralph informed the investigators that he and Francesca had spent the entire evening at home, wrapping presents and watching football. He claimed the last time he'd gone out was around 11 in the morning to pick up a lottery ticket for his grandfather. When detectives questioned Francesca, her story lined up perfectly with his, but she took it one step further by offering proof from her phone and social media. She had several time-stamped pictures of her and Ralph wrapping gifts in their living room. The timestamps were crucial, between 10:24 and 10:41 p.m., which was the exact time frame of Teresa's attack. With that evidence, both Ralph and Francesca seemed to have airtight alibis, so detectives initially cleared them as suspects. But the conversation wasn't over. When questioned about their rocky relationship with Teresa and Vincent, both Ralph and Francesca acknowledged there was constant friction. But they insisted the police didn't have all the facts. Sure, their secret romance had created tension, but they said that was only part of the story. The other half of the story, they claimed, was that Vincent had been ripping off his investors. Ralph alleged that, by the time his secret relationship with Francesca was exposed, the business venture with Vincent was already falling apart. Development on the app had ground to a halt, deadlines were being blown, and all communication had ceased. When Ralph demanded answers from Vincent, all he got were excuses or the silent treatment. And when investigators asked where Teresa fit into the picture, the couple dropped a bombshell. They claimed Teresa had helped Vincent secure even more funding from other investors. Ralph asserted that his family's $130,000 investment, plus the additional money, was being squandered, spent extravagantly by Vincent and Teresa on themselves. He also mentioned that his family had already filed a lawsuit against the couple and that a number of other investors were just as furious. He suggested that some of them might have been desperate enough to seek revenge. It was a shocking claim, one that totally changed the direction of the investigation. Detectives now had to look at the case from a completely new angle. Could the assault have been payback related to the failed business deal? They put together a list of every single investor involved with Vincent's app, and started questioning them one after another. But to their astonishment, not one of them expressed the kind of rage Ralph had described. Most of them said they had already gotten their money back, and none of them appeared to think Vincent or Teresa had committed any crime. With their leads drying up and no viable suspects, investigators began to broaden their search. They started looking into recently released convicts, checking anyone in the area with a history of violence, but came up empty. Just when it seemed like the case was going cold, a new piece of evidence surfaced. When the analysis of Teresa's phone records came in, one name immediately jumped out at investigators. The person who contacted her the most, and the one she'd been fighting with constantly in the weeks before the assault, was Ralph Kepler. It turned out that for months before she was attacked, Ralph had been bombarding Teresa with a relentless stream of disturbing and threatening messages, texts, emails, and even unsettling images, each one practically vibrating with rage and obsession. In these messages, Ralph accused Teresa of stealing from his family, calling her a liar, a thief, and a whole lot worse. This discovery was a game changer. Detectives immediately went back to review all the surveillance footage they had gathered from the area around the crime scene on the night of the assault. And that's when a chilling realization washed over them. The man they saw tailing Teresa, end quote, his build, his posture, his very movements. It was an almost perfect match for Ralph Kepler's physique. The broad shoulders, the muscular frame, and that confident stride. It felt like the puzzle pieces were finally clicking together, but a strong suspicion wasn't going to be enough. The detectives knew they needed solid, irrefutable evidence to nail Ralph. Plus, they still had a lot of loose ends, like his seemingly unbreakable alibi and the lingering question of whether Francesca, Teresa's own daughter, was somehow involved. Fortunately, those threatening messages gave them the leverage they needed, and investigators were able to get search warrants for both Ralph's and Francesca's phone records. What they uncovered next sent a shiver down their spines. About 2 weeks before the attack, Francesca's phone records showed a call to a toll-free number, one that started with 1-800. That call was traced to a company named Spytech. When detectives reached out to the company, they made a bombshell discovery. Their records showed a recent purchase made with Francesca's credit card. Just days before the assault, she had bought a small GPS tracking device. This was the break that cracked the case wide open. Spytech handed over the data logs from that very tracker to the authorities, and the second detectives opened the file, they knew they were looking at something major. The device had been moving back and forth between just 2 places, Teresa's apartment and the school where she worked. Investigators were now convinced that Ralph and Francesca had secretly planted the tracker on Teresa's car, watching her every move in the days leading up to the assault. Their suspicions were about to be confirmed. When police got access to Francesca's email, her inbox was filled with dozens of automated GPS alerts, each one time-stamping a specific location. Every single time Teresa left her house, went to work, or made any stop in between, Francesca got an alert, and with every ping, the chilling outline of their plan became clearer and clearer. Additional search warrants for Ralph and Francesca's cell phone location data revealed a deeply disturbing pattern. Every few days, their phones would ping in the exact same locations as the GPS tracker they'd hidden on Teresa's car. It didn't take long for investigators to figure out what they were seeing. These were the moments when the pair was sneaking out to switch the tracker's batteries, keeping it active for months as they silently stalked Teresa's every move. The mountain of evidence was piling up fast, and it was starting to completely demolish the picture-perfect alibi that Ralph and Francesca had so carefully constructed. Just minutes after the attack on December 4th, phone records showed a call was made from Francesca's phone to a taxi service in Long Beach. The call came from Lynbrook, the very same town where the couple lived. For the detectives, there was only one possible explanation for this. Francesca had called that cab for Ralph, setting up his escape. The police contacted the taxi company, and their dispatch logs led them directly to the driver. who was on duty that night. It was a woman, and she instantly recognized the man they were describing. She remembered him very clearly. She said he jumped into the very back seat of her van, ducking down as if he was trying to hide, and demanded that she drive him to the nearest train station. Then, for a $5 fare, he tossed her a $20 bill and told her to keep the change. Detectives immediately pulled the security footage from both ends of that cab ride, from the pickup spot to the train station, and there he was, clear as day. The very same man Franklin Cosma had chased away from the scene of the crime. The very same man whose build and walk were a match for Ralph Kepler on January 24, 2018, over a year after the assault. Ralph Kepler was placed under arrest. In a twist of irony, he was taken into custody while on the job at Rikers Island, where he was employed as a corrections officer. He was officially charged with attempted murder in the second degree. Ralph refused to cooperate with investigators, but at this point, it made no difference. The case against him was airtight. A court order was issued for a DNA swab, and the results confirmed what detectives had suspected all along. Ralph's DNA was a perfect match to the sample found on the metal dumbbell bar recovered near the scene of the crime. The blood on it, just as they'd expected, belonged to Teresa Keel. But when it came to Francesca, the picture was far less clear. While the evidence pointed to her involvement, her claim that Ralph had manipulated and controlled her made everything more complicated. Friends painted a picture of Ralph as abusive and controlling, stating he had isolated Francesca, turning her against her own family, and convincing her they were all plotting to steal her inheritance. Despite this, prosecutors uncovered two critical pieces of evidence that compelled them to move forward with charges against her. The first came from a newly issued warrant for her internet search history, and what they found was absolutely chilling. In the days leading up to and following the attack, Francesca had searched for incriminating phrases like, "How reliable is DNA evidence?" "How to kill someone and get away with it?" and "weakest part of the skull." Then, in November of 2018, after almost 2 years in a vegetative state, Teresa Keel passed away.
The victim's daughter and her boyfriend are now charged with murder. Eyewitness News reporter NJ Burkett is live in Hempstead with the story. NJ?
Well, detectives say it was all about money and a business venture that went south. A woman is allegedly murdered as payback, and the suspects, the woman's daughter and the daughter's boyfriend. Conspiring with her 27-year-old boyfriend, Ralph Kepler, a former Rikers Island correction officer, accused of using a... Detectives say 21-year-old Francesca Keel plotted the cold-blooded murder of her own mother, a barbell to shatter the skull of Teresa Keel, a beating prosecutors described as barbaric.
She was hit several times about the head with a barbell. It's caused severe injuries to her head and a loss of her right eye.
Inside her apartment in Long Beach, Long Island. It happened in December of 2016. Mrs. Keel survived for nearly 2 years, partially blind and comatose, until she died this weekend. Kepler was already facing assault charges. Francesca Keel had not been charged until today. Her lawyer says the arrest came as a shock.
Francesca, unfortunately, has to bury her mother while also fighting these allegations, which she obviously vehemently denies.
At the heart of the case, legal motions and a lawsuit. Kepler was suing Teresa Keel over a dating app they were developing and money he and his family invested that the victim allegedly squandered. Mark Gann is Kepler's attorney.
I believe that there are others that had motives to attack her. We've investigated some of those. I can't get into detail right now. But I fully believe that Ralph is innocent of these charges, and I expect to be able to prove that in court.
But Teresa Keel's civil attorney says he lived in fear of Ralph Kepler and even carried a panic button.
The Nassau County police told me that I was in danger, and they gave me some security devices so that I could protect myself and my family.
Well, the civil lawsuit is on hold tonight in light of the new criminal charges. I'm told the couple were still living together.
The charge against Ralph was immediately upgraded to murder in the second degree. Francesca was also arrested and charged with murder. As the trial date loomed, prosecutors felt confident they had finally pieced together the entire puzzle. They were prepared to prove that Ralph and Francesca had conspired to commit murder. The pair had purchased the Spytech GPS tracker, monitored Teresa's movements for weeks, and orchestrated a meticulously planned attack. On the night of December 4th, as soon as Francesca received a GPS alert that her mother was leaving for dinner, Ralph drove to Long Beach and lay in wait for her return. While Ralph was carrying out the brutal assault, Francesca was busy maintaining the illusion of being home, carefully constructing her alibi. Although there was no direct evidence to prove how she faked the timestamps on the photos, investigators had a working theory. She and Ralph had taken the pictures earlier that evening, uploaded them to a temporary account or a burner phone, and then deleted them before 10:30 p.m., only to re-download and post them later, making it seem as though she was home at the time of the attack. Detectives also suspected that at least one burner phone was used to coordinate the getaway, which would explain how Ralph was able to contact her after the assault so she could call for the cab. In the end, despite their repeated denials, both Ralph and Francesca accepted plea deals. Ralph pleaded guilty to murder in the second degree, conspiracy in the second degree, and criminal possession of a weapon in the fourth degree. In June of 2020, he was sentenced to 22 years to life in prison. Francesca, whose role was considered secondary yet undeniable, pleaded guilty to manslaughter in the first degree and received a sentence of 13 years in prison. As of this recording, both remain incarcerated. According to Department of Corrections records, Ralph Kepler will become eligible for parole in 2040 at the age of 50. Francesca Keel will be eligible in 2029 when she turns 32. 2 lives were forever ruined. 1 life was tragically cut short, and a mother's love was betrayed in the most unthinkable way. Thank you for watching. If you found this case compelling, please like and subscribe for more true crime documentaries. We'll see you in the next investigation.